So, since I'm the curator of sound art, I'm not going to present any of the works that we've actually developed because I think they just need more time, and it's nothing I can just give you in clips. So I'm going to read you a bit about the whole project and my curatorial approach. So, as we have heard several times today, museums communicate with the public through objects. By arranging material things within different contexts, the institution constructs their histories, the objects' histories, and tells their stories. It conveys knowledge and state-of-the-art research, all of which may be, and perhaps are, tinged in the styles, narratives, pressing societal interests and ideologies of their respective times. When I was asked to be the curator for sound art interventions at the Museum of Natural History here in Berlin, I was pleased to find that the director Johannes Vogel's plan was to create a productive disorientation inside his institution. We heard him say that today. So my perspective as a broadcaster and a curator for sound art is that objects are more than meets the eye. There are more than just a visual experience. They have a hinterland, and perhaps a hinterland that, beyond the facts of science, is open to creative interpretation. So it was exactly that vast hinterland that I wanted the artists involved in this project to discover. Now, it is the generic quality of sound that it is more ambiguous and open, less decisive and perhaps authoritative than all things visual. It envelops the world of the object the way scent does. And it's equally inescapable and at times alluring. Ideally, sound works on our minds like a magnet does, plucking from it all different kinds of memories, interpretations, histories, and making them circle around the specimen or environment on show. My hope was, and is, that ephemeral sound interferences enable people to perceive imaginary alternatives, or at least possibilities, to a current official narrative. In the same way as Johannes plotted to productively disorient his scientific staff, I, in my function as curator, aimed at undermining a routine on the side of the artists involved. I specifically chose A.K. Dolven, Marie-Louise Görke and Matthias Pusch, who formed the duo Serotonin, Ulrike Hage and Mark Ravenhill, not only because they are good thinkers, collaborators and dialogists. I wanted them on the project because they had never before worked in a museum of natural history, so that they found themselves to be productively disoriented as well. The artist's approach was and has been of creating a sound artwork in many different ways. They did it as straightforward documentations, as recordists, as inventive storytellers and tongue-in-cheek fabricators of alternative or imaginary research histories, and of poets as well as dramatists who analyzed their favorite specimen or the spaces in which they are kept, in which they are shown. All of them talked extensively, and that's important, to the museum staff to pick up their histories, their stories, their interests, as well as their specific involvements with the museum. And this material was then translated into words, into a literal and actual expedition, or into sarcastic stories about explorers of the 19th century. In some instances, the sound works transcended the actual physical space of the museum to enter into radio space via co-productions with two of Germany's public service radio stations. I should also say at this point that I found it extremely helpful and productive throughout the project so far that it all happens in close partnership and in a passionate dialogue between the artists, the curators, and the department it is run by. And maybe I should just give you sort of two words of explanation about the two interventions we've already made. A.K. Dolven's work, she's an artist who's based in London and on Lofoten Islands in northern Norway, The work was called Sound Outside the Window, and one part of the work is for the sensational display of the wet collection here at the museum. And she actually wanted to use the animal sound archive, and she wanted to work with them. But then she discovered that they did not have fish sound in the sound archive, and she used her budget to organize an expedition to the North Atlantic, near her home place on Lofoten. And the expedition was enthusiastically sort of set up together with the curator of the Animal Voices Archive, Karl-Heinz Frommel, and with Anita Hermannstetter, and they went up there to record the mating calls, or rather the mating sounds of the Arctic cod. Now these mating sounds, I mean, they had hours and hours and hours of material, was kind of condensed into an 8-minute piece, which was then played back to the dead animals in the wet collection. The other intervention she did was for the Birds Hall, which is usually not open to the public, and that was something that I, as a curator, found particularly interesting, get the audience behind the scenes and into the, I think, already highly engaging bird collection there. And A.K. Dolven wrote a 20 minutes poem, if you like, which was then produced by 10 different, together with Deutschlandradio Kultur, and acted, or spoken rather, by 10 actors, and again played back. The audience was locked in, if you like, into the room for 20 minutes to look at the birds while listening to the sound poem. And I believe Anita is going to talk a bit more about the work tomorrow. The second intervention, carried out by Serotonin, was a completely different thing. I mean, Serotonin, I have to say, are not in the strictest sense sound artists, but they are fantastic radio artists. So they used all their skills of writing and producing radio works and wrote 5 small, mini, sarcastic, or whatever, or maybe comic radio snippets, radio drama snippets, which were then displayed in something which they called acoustic dioramas, which they built themselves. You actually popped your head into the acoustic diorama, which were, and there were 5 of them, which were spread in around 3 sections, of the museum. So you would go from one room to the next while then listening to their stories. And the interesting thing about that was that it was a comic history of an explorer, of how the explorers sort of, how what their endeavors were, how they managed to do their explorations in the 19th century. So, however different the artistic approaches may have been, all artists drew upon and draw upon, I mean, there's another one to come, our fascination of listening in public or semi-public, of listening to human and animal voices, to structured noise and ambient sound, as well as to artful composition of words and music, and of experiencing a concrete and palpable and visually overpowering space as an ephemeral space for potentially different ways of telling the story, of seeing or of thinking or of acting inside the collection. And I think since we sort of shrank it down from 10 minutes to 5, I think I'm going to stop here. And thank you for your attention.